The United Nations Human Rights Office in Ouagadougou, the capital, has consistently accused the military government of Burkina Faso of human rights violations. It has accused the government of extrajudicial and unlawful killings. They have accused the government of enforced disappearances and restrictions on our freedom of expression and shrinking civil spaces. All these accusations leveled against them. If you have seen what's happening in Mali and Niger and especially Nigeria, you will know that these accusations are nothing but baseless and a propaganda gimmick to make the Burkina Faso government look bad in the eyes of the international community.
All right. Welcome to This Week in Africa. The UN wants to destroy Traoré, Burkina Faso's human rights accusations. Today, we have a number of different stories that we will be reviewing. We will also be talking about Tyla canceling her concert in Nigeria. We'll be also speaking about the speech that Ibrahim Traoré gave on their Independence Day with the opening of the brand new stadium. And we will also be talking about the Ceuta crisis that's happening in close to the Spanish border in northern Africa, and then the mining overhaul that could raise $883 million for Mali. And then lastly, or part of what we'll talk about is the UK-Kenya military standoff that is happening, and there's a long history there. Before we do, we'll get into introductions. So I'll turn it over to my co-host to introduce herself before I introduce myself.
Hello, my name is Gloria Ayo, founder, host, Diaspora Station, and co-host of This Week in Africa with Joe Hatagwa, and very happy to be back.
All right, and today I am representing the AES. I guess you can't see it because there's writing on the screen, but I have merch available where we represent the leaders of the continent. And if you want to represent, you can head over to AuthenticAfrican.com to represent as well. I'll show you just really quickly. There we go. So yeah. AES. And it features all the members of the AES, not just Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso, but you can head over to AuthenticAfrican.com to pick up your own. And also the hats are available too with the logo, and it says.
I love the hat. I have to, okay, I'm going to just stop talking about it and being about it.
All right. Okay. Well, it's available to you if you want to get it. Okay. Quickly, we will get back into today's story. By the way, Authentic African actually helps people visit, move, and most importantly, invest on the continent of Africa through vetted partnerships we have with people on the ground who can help you do any one of those three things. So we'll point you to the right direction, the right resources to help you have a successful trip, invest, or move on the continent, wherever you so choose. All right, and with that, let's get back into today's stories. As you can see in the earlier part of the video, and we'll play more of it, there's tensions between Burkina Faso's military-led government and the United Nations. They've actually escalated following reports that the country's authorities intend to close the UN Human Rights Office. So the move has actually drawn international attention and sparked debate over national sovereignty, security, and the role of international organizations during times of conflict. So in this video, Toon Network actually explains the reasons behind the reported decision, the position of Ibrahim Traoré's government, and the concerns raised by the United Nations and the development and what this development could mean for Burkina Faso, the Sahel region, and Africa's relationship with international institutions. So in this video, they'll explore the wider implications of counterterrorism efforts, governance, and diplomacy. And then afterwards, we will have some commentary. But before we do, let's get back to the video.
This is how they want to portray them. This military regime, since taking power, has done more for the country of Burkina Faso than any government in the history of Burkina Faso. both civilian government and military government in the past. This piece of information before it happens, ladies and gentlemen. The West has a game they play when they want to destroy you. When they cannot have their way with you as a government because you have your own way of doing things, which is usually contrary to how they would want you to do things, they deploy strategies that's supposed to make you isolated from the rest of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, they make you feel pressured economically and eventually forces you to respond to their demands. Historically, they have succeeded with this strategy in many countries in Africa. And most African leaders who didn't submit to their demands got killed along the line. They want to do the same thing to Ibrahim Traoré. They want to kill the man, but not with guns. They've tried the guns already and they've not been successful. So all this while they are looking for options, ladies and gentlemen. All those militias and jihadists that attack the Burkina Faso state are actually fighting the cause of the West. And so far, that strategy hasn't worked. And so they are looking at going back to their old playbook, which is propaganda and then isolation.
I'll leave it there just because this video does run long and there's a lot there. So if you want to check it out, the video link is going to be in the description of this video. In the interest of time, I won't play more of that video, but there's plenty there and plenty of accusations made about the West and propaganda coming from the West. Your thoughts, Gloria, on this human rights accusation, the plan to shut down the office in Burkina Faso, and all that was said in that video?
Yeah, it's basically been the same thing we've been talking about. And I'm actually getting a little exhausted talking about this. The fact that it's clear and it's plain, it's very simple. We can all see now. We've learned throughout history and the versions of history that we've all been given, really as a world, who the enemy is, who the friends are, who the allies are. But obviously, the West, who keeps telling us who we should trust, who we should be wary of, who we should stay away from, have no clean hands. So it's the hypocrisy is actually very insulting. And this is why I say, regardless of what your reservations are with the AES or whatever it is, I'm not here to say they're perfect. I don't know any government really that is perfect. But regardless of what your thoughts are on the AES, at the end of the day, I think it's again insulting when the West comes to tell you who is for you and who is not for you. The West invaded Iraq on false pretenses and unalived hundreds of thousands of civilians. France conducted military operations across the Sahel for a decade. There was no accountability for the casualties that were there. The ICC has overwhelmingly prosecuted African leaders, while Western actors who committed documented war crimes, again in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, faced no equal accountability. The UN Security Council structure gives power to the same countries whose military conduct in the global south has had no scrutiny whatsoever. There's been no accountability. And then these are the same people, because now when you're backing them, you're defending them, you're protecting them, you've given them not only power to escape this scrutiny, these are people who now feel that they are empowered enough to tell us who is for us and who is not for us. And that's why this story, for instance, and again, shout out to Authentic African, shout out to Joe Hatagwa for prioritizing a story like this, because we couldn't even find references. We didn't even see major platforms covering it. Like, this is actually a story that's barely been talked about because nobody's giving, because they know, because once you post that, that's a trigger. That's a trigger. Because now as of maybe 2 years ago, or rather about a year ago, they would have happily shared a story like this. Or no, before a year ago, because the global protest in support of Traoré and the Sahel and the AES was over a year ago. It was May of last year. So if it was before that, they would have been so happy to post it, but they're staying away from it because they know that Pan-Africanists are not having it, or people who actually truly have the interest of Africa at heart. So yeah, I'm not surprised about reports like this. We're going to very likely see many more. It's just sad and very unfortunate.
Absolutely. And I think one other thing to think about is not only has outside actors told people on the continent how to react and how to respond, they've actively intervened to stop people from responding. So in the instance of Gaddafi, when other African leaders said they wanted to fly in, they were told not so basically they were told in no uncertain terms that they could not guarantee the safe passage of those leaders if they flew in to Libya, saying basically that they would shoot down their planes, right? That was what was inferred by the communications. And so our leaders on our continent to deal with our problems were stopped by external leaders from other countries and continents. And that is what you're seeing here. I think the other thing that I'll mention is there is a potential that some of the opposition has been unable to organize and grow. But many of that opposition is the same opposition that put Burkina Faso in the position it was in the first place, which is why they're under military leadership. Right? There's a reason why Ibrahim Traoré rose to power and that the people are happy about him being in power. And it is because of the failures of the previous governments that have been in place. So those same people are the ones that are complaining about not having the ability to run a political party and to continue to eat the money that should belong to the citizens. And so I do think it's important to speak about who is complaining to France and others and the UN. Generally, in all of these countries, when there's a military takeover, it's almost always the people who were overwhelmingly benefiting from the overuse and the stealing of the resources from the country in which was taken over by a military leader. It's not just Burkina Faso where this has happened. It's happening with all former leaders of the Sahel and other countries where there has been takeovers and revolutions, as what we've seen here. All right. So question from Abuelo. We actually just started about 10 minutes ago. We started a little late today. So thank you to everyone who's joining. Let us know what you think of this story. We want to hear from you all. Now, before we move on to the next story, I do want to speak to Ibrahim Traoré's, give some space to Ibrahim Traoré's recent speech and how he has characterized, progress to date and also the vigilance that he has to continue to take in order to stay safe and to kind of fulfill his mission. So Sovereign Media did a great job of doing a kind of an overview of how Ibrahim Traoré has described this. And I want to give you guys a little bit of that. And we'll play a video from Sovereign Media. Shout out to those folks because they do a great job. They have reporting on the ground in Burkina Faso, which is very rare to see. And so we want to hear from them and then we'll play a video. So what they say is Thomas Sankara is one of Africa's most beloved leaders, and rightfully so. However, one of the reasons why Sankara is not demonized in the Western media as other African leaders is because of how short-lived his rule was. So if you guys are not aware, Sankara came to power in 1983 at the age of 33 and was assassinated in 1987 at the age of 37. So tragically, Sankara was unalived by none other than, Blaise Compaoré, his right-hand man. So Compaoré helped Thomas Sankara come to power in the 1987 coup. That year, Thomas Sankara was a political prisoner in the town of Po, and under the former president, he had formed a revolutionary military organization and the previous year. And so Sankara successfully and fully trusted and believed in Compaoré. And so one of Sankara's close comrades, Some, warned Sankara that Compaoré was plotting against him, but Sankara reportedly responded, It is your concerns that worry me. Blaise won't go that far. I don't think he's capable of it. And besides, I can't see how he would go about pulling off such a coup, given that the balance of power within the armed forces is clearly against him. Even if he managed to unalive me, it wouldn't matter. So now, fast forward to July 16 of 2026, in a recent speech by Burkina Faso's current leader, Ibrahim Traoré, he took a different approach. And he insists that there is no first and second in command in the country's progressive revolution, people's revolution. He is charged with defending and protecting his country's sovereignty and will not let anyone get in the way of that or threaten the process. So while Traoré is long publicly admired, Sankara, much has changed between the years of 1983 and 2026. In this current context, Burkina Faso is under attack by paramilitary squads, and those in the Sahel are backed by powers such as France and Ukraine. That's according to them. So this differing security situation is another reason why Traoré is obliged and obligated to take a different approach from that of Sankara. So I'll play a little bit from our friends at Sovereign Media, and we will have some commentary on the other side. After several assassination attempts, Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré has made it clear that he doesn't want to go out like Thomas Sankara in reference to the betrayal of Burkina Faso's former revolutionary leader, who of course was unalived in 1983.
Je vais vous dire une chose, que ce soit clair dans la tête de tout un chacun. Le contexte que nous vivons, ce n'est pas le contexte de 1987. Que ce soit clair.
While the Western media blasts Traoré as an authoritarian, he explains that he cannot afford to allow betrayal from his potential second in command. Blaise Compaoré, Thomas Sankara, assassinated the former revolutionary leader, was suspected French and CIA support.
Moi, je n'étais pas en prison et que quelqu'un est venu en prison me chercher après un coup d'État pour mettre au pouvoir, comme ce fut le cas avec Blaise Compaoré. C'est carrément différent. Parce que oui, Sankara était en prison, Blaise a quitté à Pau, il est venu, il l'a libéré, il l'a mis au pouvoir. C'est normal qu'on parle peut-être de numéro 1, de numéro 2, je ne sais quoi. Ce n'est pas notre contexte. Moi, quand j'ai quitté avec mes hommes, j'étais en tête, il n'y avait pas un seul soldat devant moi. Donc, ce n'est pas la même chose.
When taking into consideration the destabilizing wars waged and the fate by the terrorist organization that Burkina Faso has been facing for over a decade, Traoré made it clear that leading a revolution during wartime is very different from a powerful coup.
C'est pas que je suis venu à Ouagadougou, aller m'asseoir, me cacher dans une villa et puis dire aux gars, allez-y faire, et puis le soir je me bombe la poitrine devant la RTV. Ce n'est pas comme ça. Quand la 14-5 a tourné, j'étais à moins de 100 mètres et j'étais la première victime. Donc, évitez de faire l'amalgame. Il n'y a ni numéro 1, ni numéro 2, ou numéro combien. Il n'y a pas de numéro. Il n'y a pas deux capitaines dans un bateau. C'est clair, c'est net.
So I don't know how small on screen that was for you all to see. I know it's rather small. So just a little bit of a paraphrase that I'll do. He mentioned the circumstances in which Thomas Sankara was freed is different because he was not first in command technically. There were other people who wanted that place in his position. But when he was freed, according to the way Ibrahim Traoré mentioned it, he was put into power on a whim. And what Ibrahim Traoré is saying, this is a very different circumstance. He was saying in this video that it was not a palace military coup. It was in the middle of wartime, and it was a very different process. And so that's why he's saying there's no number 2, there's no number 3. You maybe saw that in what he was saying in French. What he's saying is that way that there is no confusion and there's no way that this can happen to him. So it's an interesting perspective and how he's communicating it. Gloria, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this conversation went, and this speech went, and what the response has been. And you saw people in the room obviously cheering, but obviously there's been wide responses and different responses across the media ecosphere.
Yeah, I can see why some people would feel, well, I shouldn't say I can see why, but I do. I mean, it's obvious that some people would think maybe he's trying to distance himself from Sankara's legacy. But one thing I will say about Ibrahim Traoré, and I've mentioned this time and time again, is the fact that, again, I'm referencing the global march, the global protest that happened last year, May 2025, between May, I think, and June or thereabouts, and how people stood up for this man because there were perceived threats from the United States government. And in the midst of all that, you didn't see him out there with placards. You didn't see him in the streets, getting all, do you get what I'm saying? He wasn't actually looking for attention. That was a great time to get as much PR as he could have gotten, but he wasn't trying to jump on that. He wasn't trying to chase clout off of that. This is a man who, for him, what I do love and respect about his approach to governance is that he's not looking for any ovation. He's just doing what he knows is in the best interest of the Burkinabe people. So the pattern of a Burkinabe leader being threatened and eventually removed by someone in his own inner circle is actually a real thing. Again, as has been referenced, it happened to Sankara in 1987. And Sankara is actually a martyr. He's not just a political reference point in Burkina Faso. Sankara is proof of what happens when a Burkinabe leader pushes too far and decides to stand alone. You made reference earlier about African leaders who have indeed tried to fight for the sovereignty of their countries and have things done properly without corruption, etc. When we're talking about how the West tells you which countries are good and which are bad, but the ones who did try to fix it, what happened to those people? Sankara is actually one of those people. And he actually did predict what would end up happening to him. He predicted this at the OAU summit in Addis Ababa about 3 months before he got taken out. So the man knew, he said it publicly, and it was actually by Compaoré, his own trusted ally. So I completely understand when Traoré is saying, so that's, I guess, the angle that Traoré is coming from. I completely understand when he's saying, I'm not Sankara. And it doesn't mean he doesn't have a lot of respect for Sankara. He's done things, he's honored this man, on the anniversary of his being taken out, etc. But the threats are real. We have seen the threats. However they were veiled or however they were packaged, you can see the threats that have been made towards this man. And his intelligence minister or his security minister actually did announce that. And they have intelligence services that have actually shown these plans that have been made to take him out. And they were able to disable those drones that they had actually, put in place to take him out. So these things, these threats are actually real. We might say they're allegations, but when you look at the history, it does get, really concerning. But again, he's saying, please, I am not Sankara. And I think he's also doing that, again, not in a way to distance himself from Sankara, but if anything, I think it even honors Sankara. Sankara is a martyr. That's a different level, was a different time. Traoré is dealing with a lot of insurgency that Sankara didn't deal with. They both have their challenges that they faced individually or are facing in Traoré's case. But what he's basically telling Africa is, I am not writing the ending that unfortunately was written for Sankara.
Absolutely. And just to give some context to what you mentioned, the OAU was the Organization of African Unity. It was a historic continental organization established to promote unity, defend sovereignty, and eradicate colonialism across Africa. It was founded in 1963 in Addis Ababa by 32 independent African heads of state. It's kind of the predecessor to the African Union, although a lot of people have there's a lot of controversy surrounding the OAU and how the African Union founded, et cetera. That's a conversation for another time, but just wanted to give you that context for those who may not know what the OAU meant.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, just to add a little bit more to what you said, look, I think that it is a different context, right? We're talking about a completely different country that has been destabilized. And there are a lot of conversations about who has taken part in the destabilization. One thing we know to be true is when the West interferes with a country, for whatever reason they say they do, almost always there are insurgent groups that pop up out of nowhere or seemingly out of nowhere who take the lives of innocent folks, right? Pick a country, you'll follow that pattern. Libya, probably the worst place for human rights abuses today, after, you know, a well-known United States deliberate assistance takeover of that country, you know, which many people obviously take issue with. You think about Iraq as well, same thing. You know, some, you know, people who are involved in Afghanistan today are now the Taliban. The same group that the United States was fighting for 25 plus years is now the people that are in charge. And so you see the same thing happen after Sankara. Years later, these militant groups started to build up and grow. And so, you know, what I understand, if I understand correctly, what Ibrahim Traoré is trying to say is that there's a different context now because these people are here. There isn't someone ahead of me that put me in power. You know, this was a revolution where we all agreed for this to happen as it is. There is not only widespread support in country, there's widespread support in neighboring countries, right? Because now you have the AES, which is a very different situation than it was then, because Burkina Faso stood alone at that time. In this case, now you have Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali all standing together with the AES, as you can see by the shirt. And, you know, there is a very different context today. The one thing that I'd be interested to know is what is the succession planning if there was to be a successful attempt on Ibrahim Traoré's life? Because although I understand what he was saying about ensuring that there's no confusion, there's one path forward, you know, succession planning is useful when there have been many attempts at someone's life. And so that's the one thing that I would be interested to know. And he probably doesn't have that public because he wants to ensure that if it is a successful attempt, they can continue on the path that they have been on to improve the country's current position. So that's all that I'm thinking about. And I'm sure as someone as smart as he is and as much as he's researched these kinds of things, he has systems in place. It's just not publicly available today. So we'll continue to follow this, of course. You know, obviously what's happening in the AES is something that is really gotten the hearts and minds of people all around the world. As Gloria mentioned, there was, you know, worldwide marches in support of Ibrahim Traoré last year, about 14 months ago. And there's still continued support. Everybody you talk to on the continent talks about how they'd like to see their own presidents operate like Ibrahim Traoré. So with that, there was a couple of comments that are here. You know, the citizens themselves have said that there will not be another Compaoré. Okay. NATO and the Middle East have a plan to recolonize Africa. Just look at the map of the continent. Our people need to wake up. That's according to Lion Champion 587. So just we'd love to hear from you guys. If you guys have more thoughts, we want to hear from you all. You know, we don't want to just be talking at you. We want to be having this discussion with you. So there's certain things that I cannot say or post just because it can be clipped and misconstrued as my words. So I have to be careful, but, you know, check the comments, make sure you're reading those comments, and definitely engage in the comments section. All right. So in the interest of time, we have just a couple of more stories to go through. I do not have a hard stop at 11. So if all of you are here to join us, and if Gloria, you have a little bit more time, I think we have a couple more stories that we want to cover if possible, just so the folks can hear more about what's happening on the continent. But we will see what we have time for and we will go on. There's some requests that we invite a couple of people on. Absolutely, we'd love for you guys to share their contact information with us. So DM us, message us, email us. Our contact information is in our Instagram descriptions and also in YouTube. So if you have anyone who you'd like for us to invite on to have these conversations, please share their channels, their contact information, whatever you have on them. We'd love to have those folks on to give another perspective. All right. So with that, we're moving now to entertainment and geopolitical challenges. So originally the live stream was focused on this particular story, but because of this recent discussion around the UN and Ibrahim Traoré, we decided to pivot to make that the headline story that we focused on first. But there is some recent news in the relations between Nigeria and South Africa, but this is on the entertainment side, and this is more specifically around one artist. So in the video that we're going to watch in just a moment, the folks from First Post are going to explain why Grammy Award winning South African pop star Tyla canceled her concert in Nigeria amid Afrophobia tensions. Tyla quietly removed her December 22nd headline concert in Lagos from her APOP world tour itinerary following intense online backlash and boycott threats in Nigeria. I did see that some folks in the chat had some of their own thoughts and reasons why they thought it happened. There was this whole idea of colored and how South Africa actually communicates it. I do think that there's a broader context and a very specific context to South Africa that people should probably understand and know, and to understand why she called herself colored, because in the United States, it meant something completely different. In South Africa, it generally means people who are generally of mixed heritage. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but that's generally it. You can see just by looking at her and seeing her heritage, she's likely of Indian descent, or at least from that part of the world, and has had a couple of generations in South Africa. So anyone who falls in that category is considered colored. So I don't know if that is the reason here. I think there are much more recent situations happening that have led to the cancellation. But I do want to give some context and give some background before I play this video, because I do think it's important to kind of talk through what actually happened and what's been happening in country. So first things first, Tyla's Lagos stop was removed from the APOP tour, as I mentioned, following the backlash in Nigeria tied to the Afrophobic attacks on Nigerians in South Africa. So reports say that the date had been listed for December 22nd, but it disappeared from her tour schedule without an official explanation from Tyla or her team. So the reaction from Nigeria created centered on a boycott campaign and an online petition calling for Tyla to stay out of Nigeria until attacks on Nigerians in South Africa stop. So media reports also note that the controversy came amid broader Nigeria-South Africa tensions over anti-immigrant violence, with some Nigerians criticizing her silence on the issue. So what's clear is that the Lagos date was removed from the tour itinerary. The rest of the international and South Africa dates reportedly remain the same, and no public statement has confirmed whether it is a permanent cancellation or a postponement. So she obviously quietly removed the tour from her itinerary. So neither Tyla or her management, at least as of earlier this morning when I checked, had an official public statement or explanation on the decision. So the removal came directly after the massive online backlash. So I will play this video from First Post Africa, and then we will have some commentary on the other side.
Arts and politics have hardly been separate. Throughout history, the stage has frequently doubled as a battleground for geopolitical sentiment. Time and again, a fundamental question is raised. Should artists be blamed for political tensions? Or more specifically, should they be held accountable for remaining silent when those tensions boil over. Grammy Award-winning South African pop star Tyla finds herself caught directly in the crosshairs of this very debate. What was meant to be one of the headline entertainment events of Nigeria's festive season has suddenly vanished from the calendar. Without a formal press statement, the water hitmaker has quietly removed Lagos from her upcoming global tour. The decision comes after days of ferocious online debate and boycott threats amid the Xenophobia Row. Last week, Tyla unveiled the itinerary for her highly anticipated A-pop world tour. The global run. Days of the announcement, Nigerian social media erupted. And then just a few days later, a check across official ticketing platforms and the singer's website revealed that the December 22nd show in Lagos had disappeared.
All right, I will leave it there. Gloria, your thoughts on this cancellation and the protests online?
Yeah, so I do understand us wanting to maybe not, I don't know if that's what you're suggesting, Lion Champions, maybe just focusing more on the Sahel. I just want to make it clear that we do talk about the Sahel almost every week, really. So every time we've done what we can to give as much light to the Sahel as we can, but that's not the only thing happening on the continent. This conversation, even though it's from an entertainment angle, is a very important story. And this is why you had people who typically would not even dabble in entertainment drama or story. You had them, Nigerian political analysts come out to give their takes on this situation with Tyla performing in Lagos, etc. So the Lagos date did disappear from the official schedule after the boycott campaign intensified, and Tyla's team hasn't said anything about it. Tyla hasn't said anything about it. It kind of reminds me of what happened with the Breakfast Club interview where, and I came out and did a video to clear that, of course, I had every side coming for me, and I'm like, because the truth is, when there's really no timely explanation, it kind of creates this, or it makes things escalate in a sense. And with the Breakfast Club interview situation, she did address it eventually, actually recently, and that was maybe 2 years after all that drama. So not getting, I don't know what the PR does. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying sometimes, it's good to get that real-time acknowledgement, but I also understand it can seem like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So she probably just prefers to stay out of it. I don't know what her mental state could be. I don't know. And I'm not trying to justify her silence or say that she should have stayed away. I'm not necessarily even trying to make it pick a side here, but I'm trying to give all the perspectives I can give. So her world tour is coming up, and she was supposed to be closing on the African continent with stops in Lagos, Cape Town, Joburg. But Nigerians were like, what? I thought it was tone deaf. And this isn't me trying to come for Tyla, or I have no issues with Tyla. And I think, and a lot of Nigerians did, or some Nigerians did make that clear, that Tyla, we have no issue with you personally. Others stated that, you didn't condemn what has been happening in South Africa, so you should not be allowed to profit off of Nigeria. And perhaps Tyla and her team saw it as them showing solidarity with Nigerians, or showing that there's still love, regardless of what's going on. I had promised that I would come and see you, because Nigeria is one of Tyla's key markets. She spent a significant amount of her professional energy building relationships with artists in Nigeria. She's been seen in videos with them. She hangs out. I mean, going to Lagos is nothing. Like, that's one of her joints. You can tell she has a good time every time she goes there. Because one thing, forget what you might think or whatever your reservations are, one thing about Nigerians, you're going to have a time around Nigeria. And I know Joe knows this. He loves our jollof. He's such a big fan of culture.
Yeah, he's happy.
But there are other people, a lot of people, political commentators, who have said that Tyla should not be held for what she did not create. But, again, on the other hand of the argument, or the other side of the argument, people are saying, your silence is complicity. And some responses, which I actually found disturbing, to be fair, were actually threatening physical harm if she dares come to Nigeria. Some were even in the comments saying, no, come, please come, make sure you come. you could see this sarcastic. That was clearly a veiled threat, even if it was tongue in cheek. I just thought that was like, oh my goodness. You know, at the end of the day, this place we're in now is where none of us wanted to go. No true Pan-Africanist would have wanted this to happen. And this was part of the, this was one of the things we're saying when everything started boiling in South Africa, just the ripple effect, how this, because it's not only Tyla, there have been other artists, other South African artists whose concerts across Africa have had to be canceled because of all this tension. And I'm sure it's not just artists, there are probably speakers, there are people who are, who have things, entertainers, politicians, who businesses that would have been scheduled to, be planted in certain parts of Africa, but those would have to be canceled because of the tension. And, we have to be fair to the Nigerians who have reservations around it. I'm not encouraging extremism or violence in any way, but there have been, people have lost their lives in this process. Nigerian nationals, this has been documented, at least 118 Nigerians between 2015 and 2026 alone. There's been documentation of them losing their lives, in this wave of what's been going on. We've had emergency repatriation flights. We've had diplomatic summoning of the SA High Commissioner. So there's real grief there. And I guess that grief needed somewhere to go. It's just unfortunate that, Tyla had to bear the brunt of it. But again, on the other hand, an artist, a South African artist, announcing a concert in Lagos in the middle of all the drama was definitely going to become a lightning rod, regardless of whether she personally deserved to be one. So and that's why when someone says, let's focus on Sahel, perhaps you're thinking this is, and I'm not assuming, but please bear with me. You might think this story isn't that important, but the point is that the tension is still very real and it has not resolved. And I don't know where we'll go from here, but I guess we'll keep our eyes out on this story.
Yeah, I mean, and I think here's what everyone's getting wrong, right? People are asking whether one artist owes anybody a speech. And I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is why the only leverage Africans have and they could find against a crisis in South Africa was a concert ticket. That's actually not power, right? That's what you have. That's what's left when you don't have any power as people. And so they're just utilizing the systems that they have in front of them to protest a situation that is happening where leadership doesn't seem to be coming up with a solution, right? And so I think that this is why we're talking about this, is not just because it's a popular topic, but because this is a constant issue that seems to be getting worse, and it seems as though there isn't much happening on the leadership side, and this is what the people are doing to respond to this situation. Look, there are so many things that we could talk about in terms of the historical context between South Africa and Nigeria over the last 36 months, right? Going back to the pageant winner who was of Nigerian descent, the taxis, Uber taxi, like the little things going back and forth, the online debates. And I think what we'd like to see more of is leadership actually taking a stance and coming up with solutions as opposed to statements. So that, I think, is really where the main issue is. And I think that that's probably what we're seeing as a result of that. I mean, the expectation, of course, is that an artist will make a statement about what is happening. And to your point, some people know when they're out of their depth and they decide to stay out of a conversation. She is a young girl under 25 years old. I know she sees what we all see, but she also knows that every single word that she speaks will be held onto and held against her. And she does not want to be a political figure. She just wants to perform music. And so, some people have an issue with that. I think where I take issue when someone doesn't speak about something is when they speak about other things. If someone never talks about anything, then you should never expect them to. But if someone calls out human rights abuses in one way and doesn't call out human rights abuses in another way, I think that's when you should hold them accountable. That's just my personal opinion. I think you hold people to the standard that, there's a baseline, right? And you hold them to that standard. She's clearly just a fun-loving entertainer. maybe at a different point in time in her life, she will take a stance on certain things. But at this point, from what I have seen, she hasn't. And so I don't anticipate or expect her to respond. Now, as far as how those who have been responding in Nigeria, I also understand where they're coming from, right? You have an obvious opportunity to communicate and to condemn what is happening, and there was a choice not to by a very large artist who, as you mentioned, enjoys and also benefits from the population of Nigeria in terms of, concerts, album sales, etc. So I do understand that frustration on behalf of the people. I mean, two things can be true, and I think that that's just where we stand today. Not to belabor the point, but I do want to now move on to some more context about what's happening in South Africa, because the anti-migrant protests are still going on, and there's some new ones that erupted in Cape Town just under a week ago. So in this video from First Post, they explain how South Africa is pushing for a continent-wide debate on migration amid what First Post is calling Xenophobia Row, what we're calling the Afrophobia crisis. South Africa faces severe domestic and diplomatic pressures over its ongoing migration crisis. So anti-migrant groups like March and March have organized nationwide protests demanding an immediate crackdown on undocumented foreigners and documented foreigners who citizens blame for economic struggles and strained public services. There have been violence and vigilante attacks targeting foreign nationals, and that has triggered a widespread continental outcry, prompting nations like Ghana, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and more to evacuate tens of thousands of their citizens. Ghana's foreign minister had raised the prospect of seeking financial compensation for property abandoned by fleeing migrants, while petitions have been submitted to the African Union and the International Criminal Court. So Pretoria in South Africa strictly rejects allegations of state-sanctioned xenophobia, characterizing the violence as what they call isolated criminal acts. South African officials argue that neighboring African nations must improve local economic opportunities to address the root causes driving irregular cross-border movement across the continent. So we're going to hear a little bit more from First Post Africa on this topic, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
South Africa is facing a double whammy. Across the continent, countries are calling it a xenophobic nation, which is unable to protect the migrants who add value to its economy. While on the inside, South African citizens are pressing the Ramaphosa government to tackle illegal immigration. Protesters in South Africa have been blaming undocumented foreigners for taking up their jobs and adding pressure on the already crippling public services. Pretoria is trying to respond to both aggrieved parties. As far as the label of xenophobia is concerned, Pretoria has explicitly rejected that and warned against attacks on migrants by vigilantes. And to pacify its people, South Africa has been cracking down on illegal migrants. And now it is pushing a continent-wide conference to address the issue of migration. Now, this is what Pretoria is saying. If only fellow African nations can provide better opportunities to their people, they wouldn't flock to South Africa by all means possible. And that would automatically help address the problem of illegal migration.
Your thoughts on this video, Gloria?
Yeah, okay. So, again, this is an issue that I don't want to be negative and say it's not going to get resolved anytime soon, but to your point that you made earlier before the video was played, if we're not having governments actually doing what they can, and maybe I should specifically say the South African government doing everything it can. On one hand, there are people, telling you about unemployment. I mean, the unemployment rate is high. It's really high. You have 32% of the youth, or rather, the unemployment rate is at 32%. And then you have the youth who are unemployed approaching about 60% of the population. Those are very high numbers. And on one hand, you're having political parties lobbying for, you know, what looks like these anti-immigrant sentiments, and then on the other hand, so it's become like a political tool as well. And then on the other hand, you're having those who are choosing to stay silent. You're not having them condemning it. They're just being silent because, okay, they have no interest in that. Let's keep in mind that local elections are approaching, and at the end of the day, politicians may say they're targeting only undocumented migrants, but in practice, the people that are enforcing those ideas often do not make that distinction. They end up treating anyone that they think looks like an immigrant the same way. That's what we're seeing now. I mean, and Cape Town and Western Cape actually different because it's more complicated, the protests that are happening here, because the Western Cape has been governed by the Democratic Alliance since 2009. And that makes it the major province that's not under ANC control. And the DA likes to position itself as, you know, being more open, being more international friendly, etc. But the parliamentary seat is actually in Cape Town. And Cape Town is a major tourist destination. I've never been to Cape Town. That's what, anyway, I've been to SA twice. I've never been to Cape Town. It's stunning. I don't need to even go to Cape Town. Even when I was in SA, people said, it's just a stunning place. So you have a lot of tourists who like to visit Cape Town. So Cape Town has that image of a progressive South Africa, etc. Even though we've also heard of stories of discrimination, etc., etc. That's a conversation for another time. So having protests there actually carries a lot of weight. You've had foreigners who have had to take shelter, some even in mountains. A local councillor even said that many of those sheltering in the country, that many of those who are having to leave their homes were actually in the country legally. Their children who have been or who had been attending local schools that now are afraid, and they're even hoping to leave the country out of fear. Having children being afraid is actually a great measurable social cost of what the protests have produced. Regardless of the legal status of their parents, these children are really, really afraid. So however South Africa's political parties are positioning themselves now is what I think receiving the least international coverage, and it actually deserves the most scrutiny because, and that's why when we talk about government accountability, government resolution, you know, at the end of the day, again, I referenced the unemployment rate. I referenced, you know, what's going on with the youth in South Africa. If the government can do what it can to tackle that, you know, because at the end of the day, when you have a large, and I think about countries that have high unemployment rates, you have a lot of people with idle time on their hands. What happens when people are so idle? So hopefully the government does what it needs to do to resolve it. And also while doing that, simultaneously ensure that migrants in South Africa are protected. And if migrants are illegal, we've said this many times, do what you need to do, follow the actual protocol to get them deported back to their countries. But creating avenues where people are now being targeted regardless of their status is actually all that we've been saying we largely condemn.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just take a different position on that last piece. Those who are there maybe necessarily illegally, there should probably be at least a process to determine if there is a pathway to citizenship if necessary, right? Because there are a lot of conflicts happening on the continent, and not everybody who's fleeing to South Africa is fleeing there under circumstances by which they are not under threat of loss of life from their original destination, their point that they've come from. So you know, one thing I'll also mention that I think you've spoken to here is the fact that the public statements are talking about illegal migrants, where many cases those who have the papers are also targeted. And I think it's very important to understand that those who are executing on this, who are not executing as state actors, are the ones who are taking this vigilante justice, or what is it called again? It's there's a name for it when you have like the local justice that is taken. Every country has a name for it, but
mob justice or jungle
It
justice.
is like mob justice. That is one version. It is a version of mob justice, but it's like this local justice taken into the hands of the people who have no training or understanding of the specifics of the laws and who, in fact, they're going after. So, look, that's why it needs to come from the top down to be more clear that they're doing what they need to do and that the people should not be. Again, it's political season. A lot of people understand that the right kind of rhetoric might get them elected, and that's why we don't see a lot of folks in power making any definitive statements as they should. Ramaphosa has. He sent envoys to both Ghana and Nigeria as well, so they have met with them. So we'll continue to follow this and see what happens. Now, in the interest of time, I know we're running out of time. There were a couple of other stories that we did want to cover, and it's my fault that we started late today. But I think there were a couple things. One, Kenya and UK resolve standoff over military drill amid abuses by British troops. But I know that you really wanted to talk about the, the Ceuta crisis, why African youth are rising and risking everything to reach Europe. I know you did a video on this recently. I think just yesterday, I think it was posted. So I think we should just get to that story. Maybe you can give some context and your thoughts on, what has happened in North Africa and, with migration to Spain, with the loss of life and why it's happening.
Okay. Oh, you want me to go right into it?
Yeah, because I don't know if we have time to do a video and to talk about it, but I know you've done a video on it, and I wanted to give you the floor to kind of speak about it, because you did a video on it, and I know that this is obviously an important story.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And, Ceuta is a controversial part of Africa. Depending on who is telling you the story, they'll either tell you it's a Spanish territory that is actually in Spain, that Spain owns Ceuta historically. And what I think of is historically, a lot of things were done. These people literally were owning Africans. So don't tell me about history as it relates to Africa. But Ceuta basically, it shares a land border with Morocco. And there's another part of Morocco, Melilla, which Melilla is actually Europe's only land border with Africa. So these places, and there are other places, and that was what my video was speaking on. You should check it out at the Gloria Ayo at Diaspora Station. The video I posted, no, it was 2 days ago, actually. The video I posted 2 days ago where I was talking, was it 2 days ago? I'm sorry, Joe. It was 2 days ago. Where I was talking about the territories throughout Africa that have been owned by these countries. And I focused mostly on France and on Spain. And it's not just Africa, it's actually throughout the world. And I'm going to do the one of the African diaspora next. But throughout the world, they've taken territories, some would say stolen. They've stolen territories that and planted their flags there. But when you're having situations where people are, they're telling you, even the African Union has said, listen, these territories need their sovereignty. But you insist, places like Mayotte, the Canary Islands, are being owned by these countries, and it's just very confusing. And with what happened, though, with this particular migrant crisis, that was, you could see a sea of people just trying to escape from Morocco into Ceuta, and it was about, I think it was approximately 50,000 to about 70,000 people. So just imagine tens of thousands of people, and there are still numbers. The numbers are still climbing on those who actually lost their lives, but at least 99 of them have lost their lives at this point. And the irony is that Ceuta actually has a population of about 80,000 people. So just imagine the influx of people. And upon reaching the shore, this is a very important part of this story, because the same thing is happening in Mayotte and other parts of Africa. There are people who would rather align with Europe. They literally were cheering for Spain. They kissed the ground. They were desperately trying to get into Spain. And what led to all this is the misinformation on social media. Some people would say it was from the Moroccan government, that the people were being used as a tool. There's all kinds of things going on in the background that if I had time, I would have loved to explore. But that misinformation on social media, basically telling them that, because the unemployment rate, like I just referenced in South Africa, the unemployment rate in Morocco is actually really high as well. their unemployment rate stands at about 37.2%. So you're having people who are desperately trying to go look for a better life in Spain, and then that happens. And of course, they get there and they find out that it was wrong info. Some have well, not deported, but some have left and gone back to Morocco. Some stayed there and said, no, we need the citizenship. By the end of the day, it's just this constant structural attention to Europe by younger people. And this is not just in Morocco, this is throughout Africa. And then you also have the people who are saying, well, Moroccans said they're not African. So anyway, that's another conversation.
Yes, and I'm glad you were able to tell that story. And I wanted to just show you because, you know, obviously they're saying this is a Spanish territory, but I wanted to show you on the map where it was as Gloria was going through that background. Because as you can see, Ceuta is here. This is Morocco, right? All of this is Morocco that you're seeing here. Spain is here. It's across the water. So there actually is a waterway, the Strait of Gibraltar, between the two nations. However, Spain wants to claim this space. And so you have all these people trying to get through to Gibraltar from Ceuta and Ceuta, sorry. And this is the result of that. And look, not too many people who get there are going to have the lives that they had thought that they were going to have, right? I mean, and that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges. And that's a conversation for another time that requires more context. But I did want to give you the opportunity to tell that story. If you guys want the full video and all the context, go over to Gloria's page. And again, you will see it there on Instagram because she did go into great detail. We are out of time, unfortunately. So we appreciate those of you who joined and those who were active in the conversation. Lion Champion 587, Bentley, of course, and Dijum Boutique as well. Those of you who had some commentary, we appreciate you. If you haven't already, make sure you follow and subscribe to the Gloria Ayo, and also follow at Diaspora Station. I am at Authentic African, and we will be back next Thursday. So with that, thanks for watching. See you all in the next video. Bye, guys.